You have to do something. You have to take a chance. You do have to get involved. There are people that are having trouble. There are people that don't have enough to eat. There are people that are cold. You can go out and say hello to these people. You can take an old blanket out of the closet and say, here, you can make them a sandwich and say, oh, by the way, here. I get it now. And if you give, then it can happen. Then it can happen to you. It's not just the poor and the hungry. It's everybody who's got to have this. And it can happen tonight for all of you. And then you'll want it to happen again tomorrow. You won't be one of these bastards who says fraud. It's not. It can happen every day. You just got to want that feeling. And if you like it and you want it, you'll get greedy for it. You'll want it every day of your life, and it can happen to you. I believe in it now. I believe it's going to happen to me now. I'm ready for it. And it's great. It's a good feeling. It's really better than I felt in a long time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Carnival Personnel Sideshow. This is Jacques.
This is Biff.
And we have a very special guest, Abby. Say hello, Abby.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here.
So I'm going to get right into how Abby and our world kind of came into each other's orbit a little while ago. But I wanted to start off by saying when we moved back from Qatar, we specifically moved to Lowell for a lot of reasons. You know, the diversity was one of the big ones. We really liked the school that the boys were going to be going to. Management did a lot of research. We loved the school that they went to, and we loved the community that it went to, and we became friends with somebody who's a mutual friend with Abby and I almost right away. We've always liked so many things about Lowell. When we moved here and management's mom, everything kind of went sideways with her, we were just so blown away with the level of service we got for her from the state and this local daycare program that she went to. Community service and volunteering has always been huge with the wife and I because, you know, from dog rescue and a lot of other things. And when we moved to Lowell, you know, we wanted to continue that. And we moved in November, and right away we did this Elliott Church big Thanksgiving, bunch of people, feed a couple hundred, homeless people. And it's great. But we didn't want to be we're going to do this once a year. Let's put it on Facebook how wonderful we are because we give a couple hours once a year in Thanksgiving. And then the rest of the year we step over the homeless. So when we came back, we really wanted to be more part of the community because the community was so welcoming. We got so much stuff out of it. We loved the boys' school. We loved the program my mom went to. We liked our new friends. Volunteering has been something we always wanted to be big with our boys, or at least them understand it. Like, look, you never miss the opportunity to help somebody because it's the most selfish thing you can do. Also that said, and I've told the boys this, I cannot tell you how many times my life has gone sideways and how many people have leaned down to give me a hand to help me up, whether it was something just went sideways out of my control, something unfair and unjust, or just my galactic stupidity that took me down the wrong road that I needed to be redirected. I have so many karma debts I'm never going to be able to pay. There's a couple people in my life who truly, if I live 1,000 lifetimes, I'm never going to be able to say thank you enough. I'm never going to be able to, balance the scales. And they got nothing out of it. Truly nothing out of it. In my personal life, everybody's had hard times, and I've had so many people there to pick me up. And some of the darkest moments in my life aren't really dark because those are the moments I found out how many wonderful people I have and how truly I'm as close to George Bailey at the end of It's a Wonderful Life you can be. And the bad moments actually are pretty good moments when I look back because that's when I realize how many people are in the corner. So we get back here and we just want to do more and we can't. And we're doing outreach in the soup kitchen basically said, every day of the month, the calendar is this church or this church comes in. It's one church that has a big kitchen and they can do it. And they open their kitchen and their dining room up to other churches to come and use it, which is wonderful. But we're not members of a church. You'd be surprised how few atheist churches there are. So, my sister's been, a big volunteers person, so we would help. Occasionally, management would go to the stores and buy toiletries and food and go put these gift baskets together. We would drive around town, which was nice. There was, In the dashboard of my car, I keep a billfold with, what I like to call stripper ones, but there's just so many homeless people on the corner. And if I don't see one on another corner, my boys will notice and will, turn around. And, a couple times the boys have been like, well, what are they going to spend it on? It's like, dude, it's cold. It's 10 degrees out and snowing. If this helps them get through the day, that's all they're thinking about. So we were really looking to volunteer. And then COVID hits. And we have more house than we need. I work out of the house anyways, but we're in a situation right now where we were okay when a lot of people weren't. And we hear about this organization that came out of nowhere. And we were on the first phone call and we said, everybody introduced themselves and we're like, well, we have an extra room if people are displaced from ULOL and they can't get back to their home countries and they need a place. We can do this. We have cars. How can we help? And I'm going to say, just before I turn this over and reintroduce Abby, we've been looking to volunteer. And it's actually sometimes, and once you're in the volunteer system, you're in and but we did outreach and we had trouble getting hooked up. COVID hits. Lowell has a lot of challenges as is. It has a lot of challenges. There's a lot of wonderful things about it, but it has its challenges. COVID hits, and this group that Abby will talk about how it came together. And I hear about these stories. We've all seen the news stories. I personally never saw people get together so quickly, mobilize, and not just good-natured people who want to help, but good-natured people who want to help, who have the ability to coordinate, to schedule, to put teams together, to problem solve. The few phone calls I could sit in on because I don't have the patience to, because they're trying to solve a lot of problems out of my jurisdiction. But the wealth of information and resources that they pulled in and their contacts, I'm a big believer in the rising tide lifts all boats. They put this organization together that I cannot stress enough how lucky I feel to be the tiniest cog in the wheel. And I've talked about it almost every week on the podcast. Literally, I do not look for or need a pat on the back. When I say it's the least I can do, I've done the math. This truly is the least I can do. But there's a lot of really special people who put this together. So with that said, Abby, welcome to the podcast. Could you talk something about, because I don't even know how LLAMA came together.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I think to explain LLAMA, you have to have a little bit of understanding about Lowell. We are a city of about 110,000 people, and that may be a little bit different once we get our new census data. So what had happened is when COVID started, so I actually was not involved at the beginning of LLAMA. I have a bad habit of sort of getting involved and taking over things and making things way bigger than they need to be. But there was a group of people, primarily women, who already knew each other. As much as we're a big city, we are also a small town. Everyone knows each other here. And if you work in any sort of social justice field, if you work in any sort of human services field, you're going to know everyone else who works in that field. So folks who already had those existing partnerships kind of came together and started this mutual aid organization called LLAMA. That, it's a model that existed in a lot of other cities at the time. It started in Boston, it started in Somerville, all across the country at the beginning of COVID, because really a lot of those systems that people normally rely on just didn't work. Basically, all of the systems that made our society work, especially for some of our most vulnerable neighbors, fell apart. If you couldn't go to a food pantry because you were quarantined at home with COVID, what were you supposed to do? There wasn't anything to do. So I think it was this really unique moment of people with this variety of skills coming together and sort of making these new logistical sort of avenues for people to get their needs met in our community at this unique time.
What does LLAMA mean? Because I get asked all the time, and all I remember is Lowellians, lifting, and that's it.
So it's lifting Lowellians, assistance, and mutual aid.
So it is one of those things where when there's a hurricane, when there's a flood, when there's a natural disaster, it does bring out the best of people. Some of the things that really amazed me is, again, how quickly it came together. And it's our mutual friend Laura who I think told us about, oh, there's going to be this thing because one of our sons is best friends with this woman, Laura's daughter, and she told us, oh, there's going to be this phone call. And like I said, we were on the first phone call, or maybe it was a second phone call, and people are like, this is who I am. These are some of the resources. These are the things that are important to me. And it was everything across the board, from feeding people to, and this is a year ago this week. This is one of those, what are people going to do about being evicted in this time, and what are people going to do about and then there was things like, well, the needle exchange program isn't going to be open, and how do we find clean needles? And there was just so much, and finally I kind of piped up and I'm like, okay, well, I can't solve all these problems, but these are what I have at my disposal. Here's my phone number. Call me if you guys need somebody. And it was within a week, and it might have been one of the many friends. Like, these are the people who have become real friends, and the diverse people who put this together. Somebody called and said, can you dry food on this day? And it turned out like I would meet the van, and I don't even know who came up with the van. I don't know where any of this money came from. So you can talk about that in a second, but it blew me away. It's like, oh, can I show up at point A and carry heavy things and put them in the back of the truck, and then follow the truck to point B and unload it, and then a bunch of other people will come in that night on Wednesday night and separate it out, and I ended up coming in and doing that. That was very hard. That was and then a group of drivers, me being one of them, would show up on Thursday, and I would get a piece of paper saying, here's who you take the food to. And that for me was the best part. It's like, okay, we bag these groceries. They're heavy. Carry them to your car, drive into these people's houses, call them when you get there, leave them at the front door, or these things. Where did the money come from? How did, who came up with a van? Who came up with all this stuff? I mean, I just remember I met you at a number of times, food warehouse place, and I didn't even know those places. Restaurant Depot, is that what it was called? Okay.
Yeah, Restaurant Depot.
Where did all these resources come from?
So I got involved in sort of mid-March, and where I work, which is a family resource center, I run a food pantry there, and we get food from a food rescue organization in Arlington, Massachusetts called Food Link. And I was like, well, we're not open, but that food is still a resource that we have, right? So why don't we somehow divert that food to this organization that is, and everyone was like, that's going to be too complicated, which sort of became the theme of this. Everyone told me it would be too complicated. So I'm autistic. I'm really interested in systems and logistics, and I'm really good at seeing, who has what I need and how can we put all of that together and make it work. And the pandemic was a really unique time where nobody cared about the way that you did things. And that was like perfect for me. I was like, great. You don't care about like the social mores. You don't care about like how we're doing things. If this is the red tape and the bureaucracy, I was like, all right, I'm in. So initially when I was involved with LLAMA at very first, how it was working, and this is how it worked in many other cities, almost every other city with mutual aid, is that basically there was a list of people who could offer things to the community, and there's a list of people who had needs, and they would be matched up basically. And so a person who needed food, then a person who could, either deliver the food or buy the food would be matched up with them to deliver it. Now, the problem in Lowell is that we have a community with a lot of needs. We have a lot of low income families in our area. We have a lot of folks who are homeless or struggle with food insecurity. And that became a lot worse, obviously, during the pandemic. So I was sitting in this meeting and I was like, this is so inefficient. Why don't we start a food pantry, right? So then we can pool all of our resources and make sure that everyone can get food, because this system of matching people up does not work in a community like ours. So I ended up meeting this woman who runs another organization called Lowellians. Her name is Nancy Cohn. And we basically worked together. I think we started talking around March, around this time, honestly, maybe a little bit later. And we had our first deliveries going out on April 1st. Nancy had gotten a grant from somewhere, or like Mama had gotten donations or something. I can't even remember at that point. And then we got the food from Food Links. And that was our first, we started at the church, and that was our first week. And I think we served like 30 or 40 families that first week. And we did it for the next 6 or 8 months until people started having to go back to work. And at our height, we were serving about 80 families, or about 300 or 400 people a week.
Here's some of the things that is great about working with Abby. So self-actualized and so upfront. No, you're so upfront about, I'm autistic, which means I have trouble with X, Y, and Z, but I'm really good with these things over here. And one of the first times I met you, and I think it was at the food pantry, very honest, it's like, okay, you got to let me know if I go off the rails hair, because I can get bossy or I can get like this. And I'm like, I mean, just throwing it out there and being honest. And I'm like, dude, I'm not that smart. I can carry heavy things. You just tell me what to pick up and where to put it here. And we're going through the store, and it's funny because I'm at the point in my life where I don't know if I'm really happy or I just don't give a fuck about a lot of things. Like when I go shopping, I'm never going to make the mistake of guessing, okay, what the wife sent me to get, they don't have. But this is kind of the same thing. Nope, I FaceTime and I hold the phone up, or I take pictures and send it. So when we're going through the restaurant depot, and Abby's like rearranging stuff how I put on the cart, I just step back and I'm like, I'm not this guy. It's like, dude, I know what I'm doing. I know how to put. I'm like, she's like, I like to do things this way. I'm like, dude, I'm just here to push this behind you. You tell me what to put up. But the absolute honesty about like, hey, this is how I am. Let me know if I'm going sideways here or here. And it just works. And again, however it started, our friend Nancy, by the way, Biff, her whole family plays hockey, including her. We've had great hockey talks. But these people all came together, like I said, who are good with this, good with this. This might be their day jobs over here. However they got it all together, it's just, I would show up and just be amazed. It's like, where did all this food come from? Oh, this week, the first week it was kind of a cluster. The second week, though, it went from a total cluster to a cluster. And the week after that, it went to, things are starting to get streamlined, and everybody took input. Like I ended up saying to like Nancy, it's like, if I can get the addresses the night before, I can plot out, it's because I don't know Lowell that well. And so I could plot my day, and she's like, oh, all the drivers should be there. How helpful everybody was. I would get to a house, or I would call a house who doesn't speak any English, which is funny. I've talked about this on the podcast. It turns out if somebody speaks a different language than you, the whole American thing of speaking slower or louder, Spanish people do that too, and people were trying to, and I would call my wife and she speaks some Spanish, and it really helped. I usually like to text saying, hey, I'm going to be there in 15 minutes, or the night before, I'm going to be here in this window. And one of the really nice volunteers, who spoke Spanish, I'm like, can you write a message on my phone that I can copy and paste when I go to Spanish people's houses? But so one week you get there and there's all this food. Where did this food come from? And then the next week you get there, it's like, oh, fuck. Somebody decided, we should also get these people toiletries. Like, this was during the height of the toilet paper crisis, and they somehow were getting toilet paper to give these people. Oh, fuck. Now they get diapers and baby formula. And it was like week by week, the resources that Abby and the team were able to put together, and I would just come in it was just amazing how thoughtful and how widespread it was. Like who decided, oh, okay, it's got to expand beyond food, that they need these other things, and we can put the same apparatus. How did that come about?
Yeah, so actually in the very, very beginning, we were only shopping at Costco. I didn't even know Restaurant Depot existed. I didn't know how to get a how to get a membership to be able to shop there or anything. And this was, again, there was like nothing, like the shelves were bare. So here I come buying, 16 or 30 dozen eggs, and people would give me like really dirty looks. So, in the very beginning, it was just whatever we could get, whatever we were like allowed to buy enough of. And, there were days where I would go to 7 or 8 different stores and buy as much chicken as they'd allow me to. And I think, from the very beginning, we just kind of got like whatever was available. But we also understood the other thing that's really important about toiletries and why those were really important to us, is because folks, there was a lot of increase in SNAP benefits for families during the pandemic, but those don't cover hygiene materials. That doesn't cover any cleaning materials. And obviously, when you're in a global health pandemic, cleanliness is critically important. You can't fight the pandemic and you can't fight the other effects of the pandemic, this illness, the COVID-19, if you don't have a clean home and you don't have, nutritious food and the ability to keep your body clean. So that dignity, I think, is really important to me. And I think a lot of people sort of forget that piece of it, but especially in this context, it's critically important.
It was one of those things where the more things that were there when I was picked up, I was always, pretty amazed. Taking a step back, at one point, management went in a couple times and she bagged the night before. She was part of the Wednesday night crew, and she came home almost in tears. And then when I did it, she had told me about it, but it's one of those things when you experience it was really hard because you're given, here's the 10 families you're packing bags for. There's 8 half-gallon things of milk. And you are now Oscar Schindler, and you're going through this. It's like, okay, which family? And Abby knows this. I'm not good with those kind of decisions, so I would just go and buy more milk. It started to be like, oh, okay, well, and what really is crushing when you see the diaper request, and that came later. That was a couple months later. They started providing diapers, and when you were looking at the form, it would say the diaper size. Dude, when you see 0 or 1, that thing is fresh out of the oven, and and it's like, oh, and then it hits you. It's like, it's not a chunky guy like me at home who maybe misses a meal. It's not the end of the world, but we're talking babies and formula. And then there'd be some times when I would, I would text saying, hey, I'm here, I'm dropping it off. And the next day or the following week, over the weekend, I'd be like, oh, we're out of baby formula. Do you know if somebody can bring it? And I'm like, sure. And that somebody's like either me or my wife. It's like picking it up and dropping it off. And then I would, and then somebody from LLAMA would be like, oh, if you do that, just bring a receipt. I'm like, yeah, I think I can swing, there's a whole different conversation when you go into a store and baby formula is locked up behind. It's like, you know what? Put that out front and put a fucking take me sign on it. Like, jack up the prices of, like, the sugared cereal back there. But if somebody needs this, the street value of baby formula, I don't know. If you're smart, can you make meth with baby formula? Why would you lock that up? No, but I mean,
it is, that's going to lead to a whole separate discussion about why certain things are locked up and others are not, but that's its own thing. But I guess I kind of want to ask in terms of, and obviously this pandemic is a new a new set of rules, if you will, but just in general, like, having done this for about a year now, what have you observed as, like, just, I don't want to call it a government shortfall, but just societally or just in general, where do we kind of, fail in terms of, helping the most vulnerable and the most, in need?
Oh man, I don't know if you want to hear my opinions about that, because I have a lot of them. I think if I'm like 25 years old. I'm multiply disabled. I work part-time as an administrative assistant. And, we're in a situation where the actual like government of the city is sending the Red Cross to me. Like, in my opinion, if we're in a situation like that, something has gone critically wrong. I honestly think in almost every situation, especially here in Lowell, where we live, the government just totally dropped the ball. There were times, I think, especially in the very beginning, where because the wheels of government move so slowly, there was no way possible that places or any sort of governmental structure or bureaucracy was going to be able to sort of conform to this new norm as quickly as possible. I think things are certainly getting better, but I also think there's a sense of fatigue. Like we had to close down the pantry at the end of last summer because people had to go back to work. You know, there's the demands of capitalism.
Well, a lot of our volunteers were teachers. And they were like, if I was teaching remote, I could swing it, but my town is having me go back in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. A lot of like organizations, government organizations kind of, or corporations kind of decided at a certain point, like in the fall, like, oh, the pandemic's over. Like, oh, we can start getting back to normal, even though things like were not normal at all.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, some of the good things, and this just started happening a few weeks ago, as far as I know. You know, one thing is, I guess they kept the diaper thing going. You know, so that was, what do you call it, like a diaper pantry, but like.
Yeah, so Nancy's actually, her organization has run a diaper bank in Lowell for the past, I think, like 15 or 20 years. Just the way that they were doing that has changed a little bit due to COVID. So they're bringing them directly to families, whereas in the past, the diaper bank would bring them to organizations like where I work, and we would distribute them to our clients.
So some of the positive things that Lowell did do, and I don't know who did this, but one day we just get, this is back in April, like mid-April, we got EBT cards, if I'm saying it right. Basically, this, I don't know if it was a school committee or the town said, we're budgeted for $5.41 a day for kids. And even when the schools were closed last spring, you could still go and get your school lunch. You know, you could come by and pick it up, but the majority of kids in Lowell are dependent on the school bus to get there to get their school lunch. Lowell is one of those towns, and it is credit where credit's due. There's no paperwork to fill out. You don't have to be an aide. If you show up, you get breakfast and lunch at schools. It's a no questions asked thing. So they're like, oh, people can come and get this, but then they realize people can't get here, so let's send everybody EBT cards, which was great. And we called and we're like, how do we donate our EBT card? And they're like, well, you can. It's tied to your kid's school number, which I get, so you want to have fraud. But so this year it started, and the food pantry closed down, and I understood why, and I was really sad. And plus, my little guy was sad because it's something that I did with my youngest son, you know, and for the most part, he liked it. He really did. Like, there was a couple times where, you know, he was frustrated. He didn't want to do it on a certain day, but he went one day. We got the wrong address. It was like, you know, Wilson Street, and it was supposed to be Wilson Ave, and it was completely on the other side of town. And he's like, we're going to be doing this all day. And I did. I pulled over, and we had a talk. I'm like, dude, I get you being frustrated, and you totally have every right to be. I don't know when we get home, but the people on the other side of this transaction don't know when they're getting food. So you're really on the lucky side of, yeah, I don't know when I get home to get to play my Nintendo Switch. These people are like, I don't know when I'm going to eat. So let's be really thankful we're on this side of the coin. Someday you might be on the side of the coin. Let's just hope there's thing. But as far as like Lowell goes, what ended up happening, and I don't even know who contacted me, but I'm lucky they did. We live close to a school, and it's been closed. Our school's been closed all but 3 weeks up until recently. And somebody inside LLAMA, or it was LLAMA directly, started a let's drop the food off program, because the school makes the food every day and it sits there. And, you know, we wouldn't go out of our way to get this, but I was running errands. You know, there's only a couple things that the kids like that they give you, like the single size of cereal. I would pick up the lunch, but I would see walls of food, and they're like, yeah, if not enough people come to get them. And then sure enough, about a month or 2 months ago, somebody called and said, hey, we need, you know, some people to do this, and I do it on Fridays. And it literally makes me feel good to, again, do a very small part, but I don't make the food. I don't pay for the food. I don't organize who gets on the list. But whoever put that together to just find different ways to serve, it's just unbelievable.
But But you kind of raise an interesting point because and I totally feel your pain, Abby, in light of something like this where so I don't mean unless they furlough the bus drivers, right? There are people who know where to go, right? But they just have nobody to pick up. But why can't this be a push where every day they're gonna go on their bus route and they're gonna drop off food to the places where they used to pick up kids, right? I mean,
oh my God, Biff, that's genius.
Why can't you just do a reverse of that, right?
So a lot of communities were doing that. Okay. And I've had it out. I had it out with city council, and other people in Mama had it out with city council because they came up 6 ways to Sunday excuses about why they couldn't do that. And I'm sorry. I know this is like a public, podcast, and I'm probably not supposed to shit on our local city council, but I'm not big fans of them. And
wait, did you use any anti-Semitic terms when you were?
Oh God, my family's actually Jewish.
Well, I don't know if that was a big thing here, but somebody on the city council threw out it was national news. I ended up seeing a blurb on it on CNN.
Yeah,
but it was bad. The guy was really bad.
So the other thing that happened was that the entire state, everyone in the entire state got pandemic EBT. It was a statewide program. And in Cambridge, Massachusetts, there was like a city councilor or whoever who made this program that matched families, like yours, Jacques, who didn't need the pandemic EBT cards with families who needed them. And I went to city council and I was like, well, can we do that here? And they were like, no, that's not allowed. Right. And I was like, oh, okay. And I feel like every time, we saw these really interesting things that other cities were doing, and we asked folks to do it here, asked like our city officials to do it, they just weren't interested or made excuses why it wasn't possible. And that obstruction was really frustrating.
I mean, that's really and certainly, disappointing, right? I mean, these are the people who are supposed to they have their jobs because they're supposed to serve you. Yeah. And you have to go to them with ideas on how to do their jobs. And then when you give them the solutions, they're coming up with reasons not to apply them. So that's, obviously I've heard this, nationwide, but things like that is really just so frustrating and disappointing.
The thing that made sense is when they're like, look, it's to prevent fraud. And I get that. But, and I will not go off on a tangent, but when they're like, oh, well, 1 out of every 50 million people who voted in the last election might have been fraudulent. Let's throw out hundreds of thousands of ballots. It's like, you know what? Yes, let's accept it. Somebody is going to find a way to cheat. Somebody is going to get a leg up. Somebody's going to get away with something. But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, let's feed the 50 people who need it. Like, let's take the 50 people like our family who right now we're in a position where, it's like, look, the EBT card's nice. I'm glad it came, but it's like there's people who really need it, and maybe 1 out of every 10, 1 out of every 20, 1 out of every 5, there might be fraud, but the majority of the money is going to go where it really needs to go, and you're going to have to just accept. It's like a lost leader. Target knows X amount of things are going to get shoplifted from the store, and it's a cost analysis. It's like X more security versus But yeah, so if 1 out of every whatever. But when they said, "Oh, it's fraud," I'm like, yeah, I get that, but really, this is not a lot in our world. It's a huge amount in other people's world. How can we do that? But they're like, no, if you do it, and they, your ID, like I said, is your kid's school ID number, then they're like, oh, well, it might shut the whole system down, so don't do it.
Yeah, that's actually not true. You don't need ID to use any EBT card, and it's actually illegal federally to ask for ID. I know I'm probably selling Karen right now, but it's illegal federally to ask for ID with any EBT card.
We didn't know about how these cards work. It's funny because there's certain older members of my family who watch a different network, and they live in a town where there's a lot of brown people, and they'll see these brown people using an EBT card, and there might be some cigarettes and alcohol mixed in with what they're buying. And I didn't know this. It's interesting, management and I don't drink or smoke, but it's like there's some food that you can't buy. There's some like snacky food and stuff like that. So when you put in the EBT card, it just deducts out the food that you can buy. It's automatically in there. So, if you want to pay for the other part of your groceries another way, but, I've tried to explain that to people. It's like, look, I didn't think that people could buy alcohol with the EBT cards, but now I know firsthand the person behind the counter is all automated. They don't decide, they scan it all in, and then when you go to pay for it, it will only. So like I said, the fraud. It's interesting. You have a couple like challenges that you deal with. Am I crazy, or does it seem like the people very often, not always, I shouldn't generalize, but so often you see the people who are giving the most are the people who are in your position, who have different challenges, that had to figure out how to navigate through the system, who are like, you know what? I'm lucky that I figured out how to navigate this. Let me take my time, effort, and what I learned doing this. It just seems like the people who don't have, and again, a lot of the people that I met doing this, not a lot of wealthy people, not a lot of fancy cars showing up, to the food bank to deliver. But it's the people who don't have a lot to give often are the ones who give the most. Am I crazy in that analysis?
I think it's about perspective. I think that people who have been through it, people who have been there, who've gone through different systems, they have that perspective of knowing how bad it can get, and knowing that, like you said at the very beginning, you've been given a hand up, and I feel like you feel a responsibility to give other people a hand up. Being a young professional woman with autism, I feel a responsibility to help other people come up in the world and help other people be successful and help my community, because I've had so many people that have helped me.
And yeah, maybe that. I mean, look, there's been spots when I've lived in the car because I was chasing a dream and it was hard to have a day job doing that, and that was a choice I made. And then there's sometimes things were out of my control, but it's interesting. Earlier on when Biff was talking about this, there's so many problems that could have an easy solution, and with the bus dropping off the food. And I don't know why I do know why there's a pushback. Or maybe I don't know. It's like right now when you hear the pushback about minimum wage and some of the arguments where people are making minimum wage. I have a family member who had to work very hard till they broke through the $15 an hour threshold.
Wait, before you get to that,
yeah,
I also want you to think about that in the context of if those same people are the same people that are willing to say, you know what, I'm willing to pay extra to make sure everything is made in America, because you can't have it both ways.
Right. No, it's true. But just sticking on LLAMA and what we do locally, I mean, do you know a lot of these people before? You said this is what your day job is, and a lot of people came together. How did the whole apparatus get to where it did so quickly? Like who was it who said, let's do this in Lowell because it's being done otherwhere? And at what point? I mean, I don't know if it doesn't seem like there's a hierarchy. I'm kind of all over the map here. It kind of seems like everybody, because I get the emails and I get the invites to be on those calls. I just don't have the mental wherewithal to be on a 2-hour call about these things. I'm just happy to get the call. It's like, okay, we need you to show up here.
If you get everybody dressed as Batman, you might be able to have
right. Seriously, if they sprinkle on a Patriot talk, I would fall. No, but so where's LLAMA now, and where do you see it headed over like the next year? Because there's still challenges.
Yeah, I'm actually not as involved with LLAMA. I've had a lot more responsibilities at work over the past 6 to 8 months, and now we are being expected to go back into the office. We're transitioning. We're a walk-in family resource center, and we're starting the transition back to that as we've all gotten our vaccines. So I think LLAMA, as far as I can tell, I think a lot of people are experiencing that. I think there's a lot of pandemic fatigue. There's a lot of compassion fatigue. I think they've transitioned more to advocacy. So trying to get to the root of the issue of why these problems became a problem in the first place, why inequity exists in our society, and how we can address that on a community level.
And the day job, did you always know you kind of wanted to go into like a public service kind of field?
Yeah. So my background is in education. I wanted to be a special ed teacher. I got really sick in 2016 and I had to drop out of school. And I, was a little bit just like drifting. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And I moved to Lowell and I was taking some community college classes and I took a human services class. And I guess I didn't understand what human services was. So once I took that class, I was like, yes, this is exactly what I want to do. I really loved the woman who taught the class. And one of the lecturers who came in ran, this place where I work now. And I started volunteering there. And it was exactly what I wanted to do. I love working there. I love the environment. I love being able to have a direct impact on people's lives and be a problem solver at work for these families that we work with. And I wouldn't want to be doing anything else.
I think I know the answer, but I'll ask anyways. Do you think it's a bigger problem, the resources available to people who need them, or people not knowing where to find the resources they need?
I honestly think it's a mix of both. There's certain things that are a little bit easier to tackle, like food. You can get someone groceries for $50 a week. Housing, that's a whole other ball of wax. Like there's no way. Like that was something that came up in LLAMA a lot, was talking about housing grants. And I was like, how could we possibly do this? We are really stretching ourselves just running the food pantry. And the food pantry, we're spending, about $1,000 to $1,200 a week. But if you're talking about a housing grant, that's $1,000 just for one person, not for 300 people. The amount of money and the amount of land and the entire system, for certain things is so convoluted and so expensive. So I think there's certain things that need to be fixed at a more structural level. And there's certain things that are a bit easier to address in our communities just by getting people connected to different resources.
Because one of the things I remember, and I've joked about it, slash talked about it, slash joked about it on the podcast before. There was a couple times when I was delivering for LLAMA in these neighborhoods. One of them was kind of this weird. Lowell has some weird dead end streets and streets behind streets that you don't know about till you get there. And I was delivering to the last house in this, and a bunch of people saw me delivering, and they started like coming to the car, and it was like a Dawn of the Dead type thing. And I'm like, dude, I don't even know. It's like there's a Facebook page. I've never been on. I'm not a Facebook guy. But they're like, well, how do I sign up? And I felt so bad. It's like, and I ended up, I think I called Nancy. I'm like, hey, can you text me what to tell these people? And it was one of those things. It's like, there's resources out there, but these people just didn't know where to turn. And I don't know if there's enough outreach or people aren't looking in the right places, but I think, as I was doing it, it seemed like a lot of people didn't know there are resources out there, but you need advocates to help you guide, where to find them, connecting them from point A to point B.
Well, that and like internet's become like a primary utility in so many functions, but it's still I mean, a lot of us take what we do on the internet for granted, but without realizing that a lot of people don't have internet as a kind of a regular use utility. And it's certainly, and that some of them comes because of economic reasons. Some of it comes from generational reasons. I mean, we've talked on the podcast before about our friend's dad who's 90, and you're supposed to sign up online for his COVID vaccine, and it's like, and then he was supposed to be there with a QR code, and it's like, yeah, I mean, you were talking a foreign language to this gentleman, and so like, there is I certainly want I do want to see internet become more available and less costly, and really there should be an internet lifeline the way they used to have telephone lifelines. I mean, telephones aren't that useful anymore because organizations don't want to man the phone lines. They just want to do everything by internet. And so I think we really need to get to a point where these utilities and the government combined really need to start providing these lifeline internet services. I mean, I think we're really at that point. And then these people need devices. I mean, it's not, there's a huge gap between, a basic telephone that essentially you push the numbers and your talking did all the work versus, what you do on the internet. So I think, there is a lot that, it's cheaper for a lot of, organizations to just do things over the internet, but there's so much more cost to the people who really need these, access to these services, I think.
One thing that surprises me that's an issue that I noticed one of our son's theater group sang a song in front of the school committee just before everything shut down last February as a way to fundraise to see if they could get more money to do 2 plays a year instead of 1. And then when things went sideways on the national news because a gentleman just kind of threw out the anti-Semitic thing who was a city council member. When you talk about like your dealings, Abby, with the city council, does it not shock you that we live in the city of Lowell, one of the most ethnically diverse cities in America, but yet the entire school committee, most of the school committee and the city council look like me? I mean, how can that be? Even in a town this diverse, everybody still looks like me. And I wonder how much of a problem that is, because truly, I'm not going to know a lot of the strife that these different communities have in our town. That as you drive around, there's all these little pockets that are these neighborhoods that I think probably are underserved because they don't have a voice.
Yeah. So I'm actually not surprised by that at all. White power sort of strives to protect itself. 90% or something of, if not 100% of our city council comes from one neighborhood, which is the wealthiest neighborhood in our community. And hopefully this year there's a new system of voting that was decided by a lawsuit because there is not fair representation of especially our Asian and Latino communities, which are a huge percentage of the population here in Lowell. So it's incredibly important that we get more diversity on the city council. And I'm really hoping now that we have these new voting blocks that are set up, that it'll get better.
It's funny because I've actually toyed with the idea of running for different offices before. I mean, I'm a political junkie. I want to do more, but I mean this when I say it, because there's enough of me out there. There's enough of middle-aged, junky white guys sitting on the school committee board. And truly, even the neighborhood we live in, we do not – the neighborhood that Abby is talking about, the history of Lowell, it was a mill town. It was the center of the known universe around 1840. And that's not hyperbole. Lowell was the center of the world during the Industrial Revolution. And you still have these tenement houses where the mill girls worked, and then you still have the mansions where the mill owner. And there's a section of town where it is the most beautiful, huge, 1840 houses that are immaculate. And that's where all the politicians come from. The section of town that we live in, most people think we live in Kingsborough. Like there are people, our sons went to school on the other side of town, and when we would have gatherings, birthday parties, or have people come over for pool parties, there's some people like, I didn't know this part of Lowell existed. It's like, oh, when did you move here? My mom was born here. and they didn't know that it, but like, that's what I mean. But when my son went and he sang at the thing, and we're in the balcony and management, my wife and I were looking down, it's like, old white guy, really old white guy, old white guy. And we're like, dude, we specifically chose Lowell versus living in the town where my brother and sister live, because in that town, you're 8th generation Irish American or 9th generation Italian American. You're either white or translucent. And, where the boys grew up, in Los Angeles, and we lived in a very diverse neighborhood. My friends are very diverse. Management's friends are very diverse. And then we lived in the other side of the world where we were the people with the accent having trouble with the language, and we never felt more welcomed anywhere than when we moved over there. So we wanted to live in a diverse community, but it's sad that 150 years later, no matter how diverse Lowell is, that the shots are still being called by guys who drop anti-Semitic things in city hall meetings versus people who look like Biff, people who look like, my wife, people who look like, my son's friends' parents and stuff. I don't know how to make that happen, but I think a lot of the problems that you're trying to deal with, that LLAMA's trying to deal with, that your family service is trying to deal with, might be a little better served if there were more either people like you who have these challenges who understand it, or people who look like Biff who understand those community needs, and those communities are vibrant communities who are just underserved, or they pay their taxes, they pay whatever, but they don't get the same resources that the other people do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually toyed also with the idea of running for city council, but at the end of the day, like, I live in downtown Lowell. I live in a place where it's an old mill. But there's condos here that are like $300,000. We don't live in a condo, we rent, but there's a lot of young white people that live in my community. And, I'm engaged to someone who's Syrian, who's Muslim. So I have that perspective, but I'm not a person of color. Like, I'm never going to understand that struggle from someone who's actually, lived that life, someone who's had those prejudices against them. So I think it's really important that we hold space for people of color and that we allow them to be in positions of leadership, and we kind of step back and let them speak for their own communities.
Yeah, I mean, if I go door, like, I think I have a lot to offer. I would love to do it, but truly in this town, they don't need anyone else who looks like me. If anyone else came by and like, hey, I have this campaign and they look nothing like me, I'd be like, how can I sign up? Where can I door knock for you? What literature can I hand out? But your family service thing, how much is it changing now that everything is starting to open back up? Is it overwhelming? Are there more problems now that you guys are dealing with that didn't exist before COVID, or is it just leveling off to the way it used to be?
No, they're the same problems, but even more so. We're seeing a lot of people who never would have even imagined having to be involved in this system, never would have even imagined having to ask for help, coming in, being really overwhelmed, really ashamed. So I think we're in a position of really needing to offer those services to the community, offering food, tangible items, help applying for housing assistance, help, getting their kids transitioning back to school, other things that they may need help with. So I think we're really the next front line. Once we're feeling the economic effects of COVID, once the virus part, we're kind of coming out of that, the economic blowback, I think, is what's really going to put a lot on organizations like ours.
It's interesting when you said you're dealing with people who never saw themselves in this position. Another really good teachable moment that came about my little guy being on the deliveries with me is a couple times we delivered to houses much nicer than ours. And my little guy was like, well, they don't need this food. And again, it opened up the conversation. It's like, we don't know that. Like, they might have been fine before this, and I'm not getting into the whole social thing with him. It's like, look, if you make $100,000, you live like you're making 120. If you make $10,000, you live like you're making 12. Like, people live beyond their means.
That's a good point. I mean, even in LA, it was actually reported, they've had these drive-through food pickup events, and the media has been reporting, it's just surprising the number of cars that we would consider to be luxury cars that were in line to get food. And, and they spoke to some of those people, and it's just like, what, this isn't what we, expected to do, but, we need this now. And so, this is a, it's a big event, right? This pandemic is a big event, and it has turned people's lives, upside down, literally.
But that was it. I mean, it's like the person might have a tricked out Range Rover that cost $75,000, and that was fine for them to buy it, and they're not sitting in a food line.
I would say that was never fine to buy.
Okay,
but
point taken.
It was a decision.
But that was a different decision.
But like when we would see a homeless guy, and my sons who are so anti-smoking, they're like, if we give him $1, he's probably going to send us cigarettes. It's like, dude, what else is he saving up for a throw rug? It's like I really worked on them, or I work on them. It's an ongoing thing about not judging because we don't know. And I'm like, nobody is standing out here in the rain because they're lazy and they don't want to get a real job. You know what I mean? This is harder than any job I've ever had, standing out here doing this. And the same thing, if you have a really nice car, you're not sitting in a line for 2 hours to get a $25 bag of groceries, to cheat the system, and so that was why when we went to the really nice house, there's lots of people who never saw themselves, who worked at food banks and that's what I've told my little guy. It's like, we might be on the other side of this coin. You never know when, and not judging is important, because the shaming of people, I mean, you're not a bad person because you need a hand. And the stigma that, and the number of people who need a hand. Before the pandemic, I remember it was a big thing that went around the news. We talked about it on the podcast. Before the pandemic, over 50% of this country, had said if they got an unexpected $400 bill, that would wipe them out.
Right.
That you blow a tire and you have another tire that's worn down and you have to buy 2 tires. That's the difference between being able to get to the next month and being completely flat broke. So the stigma that goes along with needing help, that's almost as bad as the the needing the help, so it's interesting that you're dealing with. How do you feel about being back in the office now?
I'm glad we're back in the office. I'm glad because it makes it a lot easier. Everything is 10 times harder when you have to do it remotely and have to figure out how to get things to people and get these forms filled out and everything. And also just being able to collaborate, because a lot of these cases are very complicated and everyone has different specialties and expertise. So, when we were in the office before, if we had like a really complicated case, like someone was, imminently homeless and pregnant and, hungry and all these things, or the kids were having school difficulties, whatever, I could just go to the back and talk to our school liaison and say, here's what's going on. Or I could talk to someone that knows a lot about housing. But now with the pandemic, we'd have to call all these different people and, they may be busy or you don't know what's going on. So I think it's a lot easier to collaborate and to, simplify things when we're in the office together.
So let me start to wrap it up and get some information out of you. If somebody wanted to go down this path as a professional, human service professional, what are some of the places you would suggest people to start their journey down this rewarding road?
I would look up, just like in your community, organizations like food pantries, organizations that have housing, different things like that, and find out about volunteering at those organizations. You can also take classes at your local community college on human services or anywhere else in your community. I think there's a lot of places that need help. So just get involved with that, start volunteering. That's how I got started in my job. And, you just keep showing up and eventually it kind of turns into a career.
And what is, for somebody like me who doesn't know where to tell people to go for services, what is like kind of a blanket thing, to throw out to somebody who might need a lifeline? It's like, hey, here's where you can find resources. What is like kind of the best thing that I would need to know to be able to spread that on?
God, that's such a hard question because it depends on each community and each state's different. So a lot of times, your local, your statewide Hunger and Homelessness Commission may have a listing. If you go to any like food service agencies, they may have listings for things like that. But again, it varies on town.
Biff, you got any questions?
No, except it's just we want to make sure, is there, whether it be your organization or any other organizations, is there an organization that you want to make sure we plug, that we push, that we, all that stuff?
I've probably said some things that my organization would not necessarily agree with. So I'm not gonna.
Okay,
I'm just not gonna say where I work.
Completely cool. Completely cool. Yep. Okay, but and then in terms of LLAMA, I mean, you had said that you've kind of transitioned. Your situation is not quite as involved, but do you what do you see as the future of that organization? Do you see if kind of folding in with something else, or what are you thinking in terms of how that's going to happen?
Yeah, I think they really focused on advocacy around housing because that's a major need in our community and it's really difficult to address. So I think they're going to continue with that. They're going to continue with the Black Lives Matter advocacy, being involved in our local voter system. I think that piece is going to become more important as time goes on.
Okay, well, that sounds fantastic.
Abby, thank you so much for doing this. If you do decide to run for office, I am happy to volunteer for you. The boys will be happy to volunteer for you.
And I will say this: I know you've both said your opinions about, we don't need another one person that looks like me. But on the other hand, if there are no allies for these other groups, it doesn't matter what your skin color is. If you're going to be an ally for those people, I think those kinds of people are important to be in the governing organization. So I would say that I would say don't necessarily make that the reason as much as you just know that I think that there's a lot of good that you can do as an ally to a lot of these, because a lot of the people, what we're dealing with a lot of the times are people who are basically against helping a lot of these people out. I mean, we've seen this time and again, especially over the last year and a half. So
definitely.
Well, thank you so much for jumping on. And I will see you very soon. But first of all, thank you for all the work you did with LLAMA and opening up the opportunity for my family to get involved and volunteer. COVID has been a very hard time for a lot of people in the country. My family has luckily just hasn't, there's a lot of hurting people going on, and we've been very, very lucky. And LLAMA has been a small way that has allowed us to say thank you to the galaxy for, the stars aligning the way that they did. But we are eternally grateful for the friendships that we made and the volunteering opportunity that the organization created. And you were a gigantic part of that whole apparatus, and the friendships like the ones that we have. It's been a wonderful experience, and it's awful to say, oh, we've had a wonderful year doing this in the worst year of recorded history,
No, but you took that opportunity and you made the best of it, and I think that's what really matters. So thank you so much for having me, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you so much. You too.
all I got. So where it used to be hell, yeah. Now it's all baby. Where we used to be sure. We used to be fine. Doing nothing together. Now there's no time. And all the focus seems forced. I can't remember the last time you whispered out loud. Didn't sound hollow. Didn't seem like a chore. The sky so it's falling down. It's falling. If it's